Good morning, welcome to CATEX TV. My name is Frank Fortunato. Today is Monday, October 22nd, 2012. The third and final American presidential debate is going to be held tonight in Boca Raton, Florida, between President Obama and challenger Mitt Romney. Japanese exports have tumbled about 10.3% for calendar 2012 up until September. This is according to data released in Tokyo this morning. It's the sharpest decline since the 2011 earthquake last year. It exceeded analysts' estimates that exports would drop about 9.6%. The bulk of this is due to a decrease in exports to China, where continued protests against Japanese problems with the disputed islands in the South China Sea continue. A team of 6 scientists and a government official in Italy are awaiting a verdict right now. It's going to come out anytime in the next hour or so. They're facing the potential of spending the next 4 years in jail. The seismologists, the scientists, have been charged with manslaughter for underestimating risks prior to the 2009 earthquake in the Italian city of L'Aquila that killed 309 people. The case has provoked outrage in the international scientific community. Some commentators are warning that any conviction would dissuade other experts from sharing their expertise for fear of potential legal action. The prosecutors argued that the 7 scientists failed to adequately alert the town's population after studying a series of small tremors in the weeks before the big 6.3 magnitude quake struck. Most observers are saying it's simply a case of bad timing rather than bad science. However, one of the advisories from one of the scientists previous to the big earthquake said that the seismic activity in L'Aquila posed no danger and advised residents to relax with a glass of wine. One would think, though, that anybody would understand that it's impossible to predict the exact timing or severity of an earthquake. Speaking of quakes, on Saturday night in California, a 5.3 quake struck just near the town of King City in the Central Valley. The only reason we noted is that it was sort of near the San Luis Obispo nuclear plant, which sustained new damage. Baden-Baden is the host this week of the annual confab of reinsurers. One of the pre-meetings was seen yesterday, and Validus Re CEOs Keene Driscoll warned that reinsurers were becoming too dependent on third-party models in order to price cat risk. Mr. Driscoll says that he would argue that our industry relies too heavily on third-party vendors for information to provide the pricing of catastrophic risk. Now, it's very interesting because AM Best today had a long article with an interview from AIG Property Casualty's Global Property Division head, George Stratz. Mr. Stratz said that the devastating cat losses of 2011 were a game changer for the insurance industry. He said in former years about 66% of cat losses came from the U.S., but in 2011 it was reversed. 66 came from outside the U.S. He said the globalization of the industry has changed the footprint of insurers' exposures. The devastating quakes in Japan and New Zealand, as well as the flooding in Thailand, were the most pronounced. He said that the insurance industry used to believe that diversifying business on any basis was good. He said, but diversification is only good if the underlying data is understood and the models that help you interpret the underlying data are robust and their interconnectedness is clearly understood, and that was not the case last year. He went on to say that, for instance, 30 years ago, Thailand had rice paddies, not factories. Quote, by putting all those factories in the middle of a floodplain, how does that impact the land? How does the flood behave differently? How does it impact normal rain? And that's just not in Thailand, but in China and other parts of Southeast Asia where there has been rapid industrialization. He said just because an asset is in a developing country and economic activity is growing at a much faster pace than in Europe or the U.S., doesn't mean you forgive the data or discount the need to understand the risk. Hear, hear. That's about as common sense as you can get. Let us hope that everybody heeds his words. Solvency II, a little bit of fallout in the U.S. The Federal Reserve has announced that the United States is going to implement Solvency II. They said that they're going to implement virtually all of its standards. Well, on Friday, 24 U.S. senators sided with the insurance industry and called on American regulators to exclude insurers from new capital requirements aimed at banks. arguing that having insurers meet those requirements could inadvertently hurt policyholders. They said that the risk-based capital requirements insurers must meet under U.S. state-based regulatory schemes already qualify them. This will be more fuel for the fire in Europe. Meanwhile, yesterday, several thousand protesters marched through London calling for an end to public spending cuts and tax increases in Britain, launched by the government. Blowing horns and whistles, demonstrators streamed past the Houses of Parliament, carrying banners saying austerity is failing, and called on David Cameron, the Prime Minister, to do more to revive Britain's struggling economy. This comes after a few weeks of negative publicity for the government. Andrew Mitchell, the chief whip or party enforcer for Cameron's government, was overheard and recorded swearing at police guarding the gates to 10 Downing Street. He referred to them as plebes, working class people. A separate scandal involved George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was sitting in a first-class train compartment with an economy-class ticket. And in Damascus, Syria today, there was a large explosion in the downtown area that supposedly might have killed as many as a dozen people. Just to the south in Beirut, Lebanon, on Friday afternoon, there was a gigantic explosion that leveled a number of buildings, killing the chief of security for the Lebanese government. He was buried yesterday in an emotional funeral. Syria occupied Lebanon for some 29 years until they vacated about 10 years ago. It's now feared that the problems in Syria will spill over to its southern neighbor. Not a good situation. That's the news for today. If we have any breaking news, we'll come back and tell you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.